twist and bend till we break. The steadiest sounds belong to the
Hey guys, welcome to our conversation series. We're going to talk today about track 2, which is Bronze Wings, and the whole point of this series is to basically unpack the songs that we have written. And Kay and I chat all the time. We're fortunate in that we're brothers, and I like to think that we're pretty close. but we talk all the time throughout the week. And what we thought it would be really cool if we could sort of come up with a way that we can unpack the story, as I said, but in more detail about why we wrote the song, how we wrote the song, and we're going to do that hopefully for most, if not all, of this album. So today we're talking track 2. Before we jump into it, there's 2 things that we're kind of building our conversations on. The first is that when we went through our Shadowlands experience, and we all go through them, the thing that we remember feeling the most is that we just felt so alone. And the purpose of doing these videos is to just remind you that you are not. You are never alone. So that's the premise as to why we're doing this. And we really felt like it was important to say this is through the lens of our story, the experiences that happened to us, the things that happened in our lives that we've written about. They're from the focus of how we process those things. So none of this conversation is about pointing fingers and laying blame. That's just not what we're interested in doing. We want to unpack what went on in our heads, our minds, and our hearts, and talk about that with you and share that with you. So thanks for joining us. Let's chat Bronze Wings.
Yeah, so let's chat Bronze Wing track 2. It's probably good to start with a bit of the narrative. So it's important to remember with all these tracks that we're writing to capture a moment in time that happened. So track 2 on the record, there's a bit of pain in this one.
Yeah.
So I'd say this is probably one of the more difficult ones, not only to write, but also maybe to speak about. Probably worth prefacing with that. But before we kick into Bronze Wings as a track, I thought maybe good for us to chat about, and also for the listener to hear a bit of the context around like what the track is and why we wrote it. You alluded to loss of spiritual community in the first conversation, Shadowlands. So I thought maybe we'd dive into a little bit more about what that means for us, because it will paint a better picture for everyone listening and hanging out with us today.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll start by saying the context of spiritual community for us was church, right? Being brought up in a church. We were pastors' kids born into a church that we attended for, I'm speaking for myself here, probably close to 25 years. Amidst all that, we had youth group, Sunday school, young adults, worship team. We were a part of the system. We were a part of everything. I think the biggest word I would use is it was home.
Yeah,
Church for us was home. It's what we knew. It's who we were. It became our identity. It was everything I knew. It's what I was born into. It's how I live my life, how I process my life. I process it through the lens of, to a degree, church and what church looked like.
Yeah.
And I also want to celebrate that. Like, church was awesome.
Yeah, there was some amazing times.
Yeah, I mean, even listing off those things, that if you're a Christian, you're listening, you will know the terms youth group, young adults. We all know those. If you're a non-Christian listening, it essentially just means it's stuff that we did in the church, right? The way we celebrate and the way we live life with that community. And some of the best memories of my life were a part of this church. Were part of what we called church life. And I think what got probably slightly deeper for us is maybe the last, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably the last 8 years of being involved in this church community. We lived on the premises.
And you touched on that with home.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there was never like an off switch, like we lived on the premises. There was always something going on. And I think part of that tied into that whole, like, just, I think we were too involved really, but like we're just so involved all the time. Whenever someone would come by, we were there. It was busy. It was busy, but it was great. There was so many good memories.
So when we talk about the loss of spiritual community, I'm just going to call it the loss of church, to what I knew as a 25-year-old. I can't remember the dates now, but that was a big loss. I think that was a significant loss in my life. Like, for me, even thinking about that now, you sometimes get a little bit emotional. It was such a heavy, I think it was intrinsic to who we were as people. And that was good and bad. Like I said, we want to celebrate what was amazing about that. But at the same time, when it left us, when we left and when that was taken away from us to a degree, I think that's what Bronze Wing's about. Bronze Wings track 2 for me is trying to capture how I felt in that moment.
Yeah. So good.
And that was the challenge. To try and get back to that position and think, how did I feel when these amazing things I've just talked about and my upbringing and my identity and my life, which was there one day, was gone the next. That's what Bronze Wings to me, track 2, is about. Yeah, it's a big chat, and I've been nervous about having it. It makes it more interesting when you're on camera and you do it, but yeah, you're right. The song was written to reflect that moment in time, and so if you're looking for resolve in a song, there's not a whole lot of it, and the song was intentionally written to represent the later part of that journey. Yeah.
So like we said, so many amazing, good memories, but also some really hard ones at the end. You know, we were so invested, and the family was so involved, and it was everything. It was all part of our lives. And talk about good times, and you talk about community. And in community, there's obviously leadership, and there's people that help to keep the machine going. And there were so many really good years of that. And I think, sadly, towards the end, there was some really difficult years in that space. And I think like a kingdom divided against itself can't stand, and where there was disunity, things started to fall apart pretty quick. And I don't know if we need to go into all the details, like whether that's important. As we mentioned at the start, you know, we're going to talk about our story and how we process those things. So yeah, like we came out of a space where we had to walk through that, and there was some really painful times, and yeah, navigating that was interesting, and that is really the basis to how we set up Bronze Wings. That's how we wrote it. And I mean, going into how we wrote it, I don't know if you remember, but like I remember being in Foxhole Studios, and we were recording, I think, Dawn at the time, and you sat down at the piano and just started doing this really sad, pretty like line.
Yeah.
And I think I started singing, I just want to say that I'm over it, that I'm over you.
Yeah.
But it was this really sad ballad, right? Like, talk to me about how it became the track that it is now, which is not a piano ballad.
Yeah, it's a good point actually. Yeah, it definitely started that way. A soft, hauntingly beautiful melody. I think in that space you're reflecting, like maybe that's part of the grief process. At first you kind of sit there and go, what's happened? And you're trying to find the good bits and hold on to them before they slip away. That's probably where that was at that point. When we got to actually producing and writing the track, I felt like we had to be more honest about how we actually felt and how we actually responded to that. And I mean, I'm speaking honestly to myself here, and I know you're in the same boat. I didn't respond well. You know, my response wasn't something of beauty and oh, the amazing times. No, maybe it started that way, and I thought, oh, these are good times that were time for something new. But it dove, and the next, I would say, the next few years was one where we really had to process what we were going through, and a lot of that was loss. And a loss, grief and bitterness and rage and anger and confusion and all these emotions that you even say you hide it with a smile in your lyrics, but we were trying to hide it with a smile. Yeah, we're all good, we'll keep moving, but inside you were being ripped apart because you'd lost your identity or lost your sense of being to a degree, everything you'd known as a child. So from a production point of view, we started to dip into that. So what was once a beautiful piano line, I remember sitting on Ableton at home, I had the lights off, and I was trying to just get my headspace into how did I feel, and what was coming out was just distortion, overdrive, chaos, you know, unpredictability in my tone. So where I'd find a tone, instead of it being a nice, beautiful piano strike, I'd be trying to find something that had a bit of unpredictability in the waveform, something that made me feel it's not solid ground, because that's what I was in. I couldn't understand where I was at. So from a production point of view, it went down that line where I'm looking for overdriven sounds, I'm looking for chaotic sounds, and I'm throwing them into the mix to see what we can come up with. And it turned into much more of a heavy synth style production, which built from that point.
And I love what you did with it. And I think it so resonated with me. Like, music has this amazing ability to be able to sort of like translate what you're feeling when perhaps words can't, you know.
Agreed,
And I mean, we wrestled with this song it had so many different versions, but your production on it really just spoke what we were feeling. Certainly what I was feeling.
I mean, before we move on from the structure, what about the studio? Like, I remember being in Foxholes and you having to get back into that headspace to record vocally the way you felt all those years ago.
Yeah.
Like, how'd you find that?
I think I struggled with it, to be honest. Yeah, I remember Chad being like, "Oh, let's change this up." So we took the mic off the stand, and we turned off all the lights, and he was like, "All right, let's just go for it and cut loose. I'm not going to worry about recording movement and stuff. Just be
Walk
you
around
and
the
tap
room.
into that
Yeah.
and feel it." And to go back there was, yeah, it's always painful, like touching a wound, hey. And that's where, like, now all the way on the other end of the journey, where you learn about forgiveness and healing and these things, it's a lot easier to move on and work through. But trying to, like, tap back into what I was feeling was like a really weird emotion. Like you talk about, you've got years of, like, identity and years of investment, and you feel like you've given and given and given, and then you stand back and you go, for what?
Yeah, cool.
And amidst all that brokenness, and you go, all right, can you just go and feel that and sing it? Yeah, I found it difficult, but I think it produced the results that we wanted to. I mean, when I listen back to the track now, it takes me back to that moment, and I'm like, yeah, cool. That is a reflection of how I felt then.
And structurally as well, I would say that we were trying to lean into the chaos in everything we did. So whether that was you pacing the room with a microphone, where studio practice says probably put in a stand. I mean, even the start and finish of the track, the way it starts with that loop that kicks off a pattern that we run through a vinyl tape to get that analog sound to give it more grain, and then the song finishes the same way.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if you start this song, you're about to go into reflection, it becomes chaotic because you get confused and bitter.
Yeah.
You explode at the end of it. It's probably our heaviest track on the record, and then we go, oh, it's still unresolved. It finished the same way it started. So
Yeah,
for me, it
totally.
was this narrative of, it was just, like, I would say actually for myself, there's a lot of healing in the process. Because for me, it was a way of just like,
Getting it
I
out.
got it out
Yeah.
in the studio.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
about
I
the
agree.
bridge? What about the bridge?
Yeah,
We
well,
struggled with the bridge.
The bridge we wrote so many different versions, and there was moments where, like, you're trying to harness that aggression, so you're going with, like, big breakdowns on guitars, and you, I think at one point you had some really, like, heavy synth breakdown, and it didn't land. And then we were trying like a really quiet, resolved bridge, didn't land either. But then I remember coming to your place, into your studio, and you'd spent weeks just completely different direction, which is with the bridge that we landed on now. And it just felt right. It had, like, the chaos and the tension. For me, the bridge was, like, hugely healing in the way that it came to me and the way that I wrote it. But also, like, within it, even though you don't see resolution completely, to me, like, there's this switch of perspective.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but it's there. Where we go from, like, stewing in the hurt, stewing in the grief of it all, to say, oh, I actually want to, like, flip my perspective a bit.
Like, I don't want to be stuck here.
I don't want to be stuck here. Exactly.
This
And I
isn't healthy.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, like, the tonality of what you were producing helped to capture that tension. You had a pretty interesting method, right, in how you wrote that.
The bridge for me was the same. We got to this same point every time we wrote the track, and we took it in, like you said, 3 or 4 different directions. Couldn't land. I'll articulate this the best way I can, but essentially, I'm gonna riff off the idea of home. For me, losing my home was the biggest thing. The hurt of the family was a huge thing. Losing my home was a big thing. For the first time in my life, and I haven't really articulated this before, but I probably felt homeless when we left the church. The way that it was set up, we had a family home that we grew up in, which was around the corner from the church, and we moved to spend the last 8 years in the church. When we left, the family returned to that home, and the church is here. So geographically, there's a roundabout that sits in the middle. what I did that night was I actually got, when I went to the studio to try the bridge, in a weird way, as crazy as this sounds, I basically put myself on that roundabout and I could look forward to see the church and I could turn behind me to see the home, my family home. And I felt like I was stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I wanted to return to home, I didn't want to leave home, I just lost home, alright? So for me, the way I produced it, that gave me the idea to write two simple lines, two simple patterns. And when I put the two patterns together, that formed the foundation for the bridge. And I reckon it was within that night or the next night that the whole bridge came together. So from that foundation point, it just flowed. And it started subtle, and then everything, sound-wise, was just being thrown in. And that's where I started doing the chaos riff lines with the synth stuff. And what's interesting is I was only just recording for the sake of putting down a demo, right? So I was just recording one take,
but when I
see if it lands. Never supposed to make a record. This is how I feel.
And then when I walked in the following night and I heard, I was like, man, this is it.
We're on. Yeah.
This is what it's meant to be. And interestingly, I couldn't write like the lyrics hadn't landed for me, but I heard that and instantly, like you explained to me, like, I'm like standing on the roundabout and I'm going like, I'll try that myself. And from that place, lyrically, I wrote the bridge, which I hadn't done before as well. I mean, it's a kind of like a weird, like cool concept to go like, I'm gonna like metaphorically put myself in this geographical point and evoke a feeling. But yeah,
and see what flows from it. Yeah. I mean, let's talk some of your lyrics. Do we want to start from that point, from the bridge?
Wherever.
I don't want to be bitter, I don't want to feel rage, I don't want to despair as my mind hosts a war for resentment and grace. Like, what are you feeling? That's written around the same part of the song, right?
Yeah, correct, yeah. In my heart and my mind, like, and I don't quite know how to articulate it, but you mentioned before, like, it's not healthy. Like, I really felt very unhealthy mentally. I was not well. And within me was this war of like, I need to be graceful, like grace filled in this situation. I need to have grace. Pair that with bitterness and resentment, and the two like just weren't like they were just butting heads all the time. And so I couldn't quite get beyond that. Like I was stuck there. So that's I mean, like I feel like lyrically it says what I was trying to say, like how I felt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you mean by wings? So like at the start of the track you say, twist and bend until we break. The steadiest hand belongs to the beggar. I'm not sure how much I can take, but I put my wings on, my bronze wings. What's wings to you?
Wings. So we talk about the story and we talk about this beautiful community that really sadly fell apart. And then beyond that, you talk about all the baggage that comes with it, emotional, spiritual, mental, whatever. There was a lot there to process and deal with, and I'm trying to like figure out how I can put all of that into a package. And metaphorically, wings essentially is representative of the baggage that I was carrying. And so when I put my wings on, it would be me lying there at night, me going about my day just trying to operate, thinking about this. That was me putting my wings on. So yeah, I felt like I was going to break often. And then, I mean, it goes on, it plays out in my mind in a million different ways. I wrestle with contempt in my denial, just like the wings, that's what it represents, the baggage, the mess. Yeah.
So your chorus line, I wish I could say I was over it, I was over you. And then we move into the last chorus, which frames up as, I just want to say that I'm over it, I'm over you. You and I are clearly stuck in some kind of entrapment of like bitterness, confusion. It's an unhealthy state. We've talked about that already. How did you process that? And for you, what were you trying to get over? And what were the steps you took, whether they were successful or unsuccessful? Just unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. That's a loaded question. Bitterness is like, it's like a horrible thing. And I spent like years in it. the framing of that, I just want to say that I wish I could say I was over it. I was over you. Is like me just saying, well, obviously the obvious. Like I wish I could, like I wish I could be over this.
Let me just jump in there and say, I've written songs with you for 10 years, and I don't think you've ever been that lyrically direct. You know, like it's so direct, and that's why I think it's exciting to like unearth it a little bit, as hard as it is.
Yeah. I wish I could say I was over it. Like I wanted to, like it's direct, but like I wanted to not have it plaguing me. I didn't want to be bitter. It doesn't mean that I wasn't. Like I was really bitter. But there's an interesting like flip. So like while I didn't like resolve bitterness, you'll notice I went from I wish I could say I was over it to the last chorus. Like I just want to say that I'm over it.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't seem like much, but for me, like in here, it was like a real like a moment of like a realization. Like actually, I'm stuck. Like I'm stuck here and I cannot get out. So like bitterness. Like I don't want to unpack everything because we've got 9 songs to get there. But when you grow up in church community, like you talk about things like forgiveness, about grace, and like they're normal terms to us, but like they're hard things to grapple with. And what has struck me with this process of writing songs, and also just talking to other people who have been through really similar things, not even in like church or spiritual related content, but just hard times where they've been grieving over things and holding on to things, is that like forgiveness and grace are not for the church, and they're not for the religious. Like they're for the human, they're for everyone. And while I won't unpack the fullness of that, because this song isn't about that, the notion towards that was where I found release, where I found resolution, where I began to find wholeness. And yeah, like that's further on in the Shadowlands journey, right? Yeah. But this song, in a very like pulled together 4 minutes sort of way, is saying, man, I'm bitter and I'm angry and I'm resentful, and that's actually on me. Like that's hurting me being bitter, and holding on to the hurts that like either others have done to me or I've done to myself. Like that's harmful. Like it's really harmful to our souls. And this song is about trying to deal with that, not dealing with it very well, and then acknowledging that I'm stuck there and wanting to say that I can get over it, that I want to put my wings down. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, track 3, Dawn.
Yeah.
Out now on Spotify. Check it out. I mean, that's going to start touching on themes like anxiety.
Yeah.
So again, it's a journey, isn't it?
It's a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, like we all face these things.
Yeah.
Like, again, like no matter what context, the pain or the Shadowlands experiences that people face, we all have to navigate these things as human. Like it's the human experience. But yeah, hey guys, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. We've hopefully got a heap more coming for you. We recognise that these things, like they can be triggering and they can be heavy conversations to have, but they're also important. And please hear us when we say like the whole purpose of this is so that you don't feel alone in your own journey. Feel free to leave a comment, but also if you want to be anonymous and you just want to chat and you don't want the rest of the world seeing it, you can hit us up at tempestcalm.com and email us directly, or DM us on socials. But yeah, guys, thank you for being with us, and we hope that you have found this